All right, good day, everyone. And the reason I say good day, because I'm here in Vancouver. It's the morning. I know we've got some folks on the East Coast, and many times we've got some folks listening in Europe. And, for those folks in Southeast Asia that are listening to a recording of this, hopefully you're having a good day as well. My name is Robert Saint-Jacques, and I'll be facilitating the session today, which is going to be focused on how to improve employee performance in remote teams. But, I say facilitate because, in terms of who I have with me, we've got a special guest today, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce her. So Julie Lachapelle comes to us from Webflow, and happy to have her joining us today to talk about remote teams. And I'm pretty excited to hear from Julie. And also, I'm really excited to hear about, her talk about basically her journey, into HR. I find it absolutely fascinating. It's unorthodox. Don't want to steal the thunder, but I'm going to hand it over to Julie and let her speak for herself.
Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate it. So yes, I'm Julie. You can call me Jules. That's my English name. And I do People Ops Lifecycle at Webflow. I've been there for about 2 years, over 2 years actually. And this was my first tech remote first company experience ever. And so I come from the healthcare background. I was a nurse in Canada for many years, and then in Australia. And after a number of years, I thought I want to do something else. I want to do something else that helps the community. So I kind of stir ship towards social entrepreneurship, helped with a lot of nonprofits, and found a lot of value in that. And when I found Webflow, I was super impressed by the mission, the people, and what they were trying to solve. And so it felt like a natural connection. Absolutely scary to jump from nonprofit and healthcare into tech, but it's been such a wonderful journey. And so I'm happy to be here today, and hopefully what I've learned over those last 2 years will help someone here.
Fantastic. And I would say, big thank you to Julie for, talking to us about that journey piece. From my end, I come at it from almost the opposite point of view, right? So, my career started in the early 90s where I worked in the Canadian Parliament, drafting labor legislation. I then became a labor and employment attorney. I then went into HR, started doing many transformations, one after another, some of them absolutely insane, like Delta Airlines after 9/11. I was also part of the company that helped build the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. I've worked in Africa, Middle East, Europe, Southeast Asia as well, mostly doing transformation work with the focus on performance management. Now I'm with Seven Geese and have been for about 2.5 years. And I started off as a Seven Geese customer. And so that's how my journey, led me to this area. Those of you that have heard about me and know me know that I'm a big HR nerd. I'm quite hyper and passionate about this kind of stuff. So hopefully, if you're in the afternoon, right after lunch, hopefully this will wake you up between Julie and I answering these questions. And we'll also give you the opportunity to ask questions on the side. So if you look at some of the chat areas or the question areas, go ahead and ask some questions as we go along. And if we have time, we'll go ahead and pick from the side. But we've got a lot of things going on. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to generally talk about, the state of work today, how do we address it in terms of remote teams. And then we start getting into the nitty gritty, right? So how do we keep teams effective and accountable? How do we find the balance when you're in your own home, right? When does work start, both in physical and time dimensions, right? And then, the other piece that's interesting is what should leaders update their teams on and help build internal relationships, right? Because it's tough enough in a normal quote unquote situation. How do we do it now where everybody's at home and spread out and having all kinds of different personal challenges to overcome? So this is the general agenda. So let's go ahead and dive right in, okay? So we're going to start with a poll. And we know where you are now, but what we're going to do is ask you, will your company be going back to the office, or is work from home here to stay, right? So we've got a few areas. Do your best to select which one is closest to what you plan on doing, but it'd be great if you can give us some feedbacks, and then we can help frame some of the answers depending on where you are. So you're looking at, are we heading back to the office full time? Is it partial remote work? Is it full-time remote work? Like some companies have announced, until the end of the year. Or are you still undecided, waiting to see what the guidance is from your local provincial, state, country office is? So I'll give you a couple minutes, sorry, a few more seconds to go ahead and fill out the survey, and we'll show the results in about 10, 15 seconds. All right, everybody should have had a chance to answer that. So if we can go ahead and show the results of the poll. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see the poll results here. So what we have is number one, heading back to the office full time, we have 9%. Partial remote work, 1 to 3 days a week, 39%. Full-time remote work, 17%. Wow, okay. And then undecided, 35%. Yeah, there's still a lot going on, a lot of decisions to be made. A lot of governmental entities have not given any final guidance and so on. There's a few states and provinces coming back to work, but yeah, a lot of uncertainty out there. So thank you for this. And it's interesting, for all of you who have joined us to see what some of your colleagues are doing. So with this in mind, let's dive in and see how this affects some of our questions. So if we've got this going on, right? So Jules, I'm going to throw this to you because you've been working on remote teams, so this is like breathing for you, right? Nice and easy, right? How can I maintain the same onboarding experience now that we're remote, right? So for you, that's daily life. But imagine somebody that's new, right? A couple months, and then the company said, hey, for the rest of the year, or it's some kind of blended program. We all know that onboarding is really important, right? You've seen the statistics that depending on which study you look at, between 70 and 83% of employees make up their mind if they're going to stay with a company long term within the first 1 to 4 weeks, depending on the studies that you look at. So onboarding, I used to give a training called onboarding, your first chance to blow it. And then I changed that training to your second chance to blow it, recruiting being the other one. But, enough said about that. Onboarding is important, we know that. So how do we, maintain the same experience in a remote atmosphere?
That's a very good question. And I totally agree with you that the biggest impression starts at onboarding, and designing like an experience that is empowering and welcoming is crucial. And so your ability to create maybe not the same experience, but a similar experience, no matter where your team members are around the world, is going to help your team member feel engaged and connected and part of the team. And so that's really the focus of it. And Webflow is growing, and we might never arrive to the perfect recipe. The recipe is growing with our team, and the needs and the demands keep going forward. So we're always evolving our onboarding. But one of the tools that I really, really love that really empowered my team to design a good experience is obviously Sapling. Sapling is not just a checklist. It's you're also able to design your own experience and really have a team member that's in a different country and a different time zone to start their onboarding at 9 a.m. their time while it's 2 a.m. here in San Francisco. And so that's been very key in kind of providing that experience and that seamless flow for team members, especially if this is their first experience working remotely. Another thing we use is Slack. Slack is our main method of communication, and we make sure that we introduce everyone on Slack on the same channel first thing in the morning. And so that gives the opportunity for the entire company to welcome them. We are emoji strong, so they maybe get 100 pings, but it helps them feel welcome. It can be a little overwhelming, but it really kind of compensates for that. Like, you're not in the office meeting people, so it's kind of a way for people to introduce themselves as well. And then one of the last thing we do, and that's just a tip here, is we do a digital card. We are also lovers of GIFs or GIF, however you pronounce it. And so we use Kudo boards to generate those digital cards. And team members all around have told me this have made them feel so welcome and connected and engaged with the team. And the level of stress you come in on your first day working remote is kind of lessened by the welcome and the appreciation on onboarding. There's so much more I could talk about, but I will keep moving. These are my 3 tips right now: Sapling, Slack introductions, and Kudo boards.
Excellent. And in terms of, you use an interesting word there, right? You called it a recipe, right? And we all know, well, especially me, right? So I get in the kitchen and kind of look at the recipe. I'm like, it's a good start, but I'm going to change this and I'm going to move these things out. So what is the biggest learning that that has, as you've evolved your onboarding process, what was the one thing in the recipe that you maybe had to change or switch out?
Absolutely, yes. One of the things is not every team is in the same time zone. So some teams are a little bit more spread. And so the ability to connect with other team members that are not maybe in your immediate team was a little bit more challenging. And so we send surveys after 7 days, 30 days, and 90 days of the onboarding. And from there, we kind of glean some ideas and some feedback from that. And we're currently developing a buddy program. We also use Donuts, which is a Slack integration to really it basically randomly connects team members together every 2 weeks for informal chats, and we're being able to kind of use those tools to leverage what was missing and the feedback that we were kind of getting.
All right, fantastic. And just to confirm, the Slack add-on that you used is called Donut?
Donuts, yes.
Okay.
like
Yeah,
like
so
the
we here at
foods.
Seven Geese, or bang. Yeah, we here at Seven Geese, we use Serendipity Coffee as well. So it just kind of like throws everybody in and say, okay, this is your coffee buddy for the month. And, so you get to learn about different people. So now, obviously, we're having virtual coffees. So everybody brings their cup with them and then, you have the same kind of chat, but that's, fantastic. All right. So, in terms of the experience piece, right? So you've given us lots to talk about, but the one, piece I want to highlight and thank you for, right, is the very, structured in terms of leverage the tools that are out there, right? There's a lot of great HR tech, coming to the fore now, when before it was like, oh, that's a nice to have, maybe we can slightly improve our experience. Now it's almost like the backbone, right? So you start with, say, sapling, right? And
Mhm.
then if that's taken care of, right, the structure's taken care of, then that's when your creativity can come out, right? And you outline some of those things like digital cards and donuts and so on and so forth. So that's fantastic. All right, so let's move on to the next one, right? Which is, this is a question we get so often, right? And especially in the transition piece, because I could see you were working next to each other, we're side by side, right? But I don't have visibility into what's happening with the company right now. How can I change that? We're getting this from all levels. C-level or tail this, and I found out a little bit odd. Senior managers, mid-level managers, team leaders, and employees, right? Everybody seems to have that. I don't have this, right? So maybe it's a little bit less with Seven Geese customers, because again, we use, they use OKRs and they're transparent and visible to everybody. But there's still that need for more, right? So all of a sudden, before it's like, okay, if we can outline the top 2, 3 things, yeah, we're good. Now people are looking for a little bit more information, but I'm busy and I'm adopting a new way of work and I'm trying to do this remotely. And how can I read minds if they're not there? And all these crazy ideas, right? So I'm going to put you on the spot again. So Jules, like, how have you handled this, right? How have you, improved alignment and communication and transparency in your remote teams, given that it's your normal, it's your everyday normal, right? So how have you addressed some of this?
Yes, that's a very good question. And I would bring it to what kind of visibility are you looking to get? How is my company doing? Because a lot of people currently with this pandemic are wondering, is my company sustainable and are we doing well? And so I think really addressing this at a company level is super important, especially during this pandemic. For example, at Webflow, we have our Webflow weekly meetings with the entire company, and we've been actively updating the team on those. And it's been quite helpful in knowing where we are at. If you're looking more at a department and team level, I would say having really leveraging your product management tools, whatever it is that you're using. For example, my team uses Asana. And so it really helps me go just in the dashboard, look at my team and all the projects that we're working on, add any comments or questions if I have to, and seeing what's about to be launched and where we at with all of that. I know my engineering team, for example, and product team, they love Slack updates. They have their own channels for their Slack updates or their own products. And these are public channels. You can go in and see the updates as well and see what everybody's working on. And then obviously when we launch things, we make sure that we put it in a public channel where everyone can see it. So marketing team just released an ebook the other day and they announced it to all of us. And so it kind of keeps us aligned as a company to make sure the announcements are in one place. And if you're curious about another team, you can actually go and access the updates channel there, but also leveraging your tools like Asana or any other product or project managing tools that you have. And then the last thing I would say is 101s is very important when you're in remote work. It's the backbone of everything. Having frequent and recurrent 101s with your manager is very helpful, even if it's just 15, 30 minutes. The ability to sync up and have that FaceTime with your manager and ask your questions, it's been very, very important and crucial in our company. And also, you know, if you're looking into having more visibility, and it also comes back to accountability and setting expectations within your team as well, making sure that, you know, you are communicating clearly with your teams if you're a manager of people. So explaining the what, the why, really outlining the context, and then the when do I need this by, and kind of really over communicating in those areas might make your team feel like they know a little bit more and they are more aligned with you as well.
Okay, so how would this kickstart, right? So, you know, it sounds like Webflow and, you know, Sapling and 7Geese, we have a very, you know, very like open, completely open to kimono transparency, especially from our part at 7Geese, you know, where employees can actually see our financials, right? They have access to them and they can see runway. They know literally how much we have in the bank right now, you know, almost down to that granular level. And a lot of companies do that. Public companies, nice and easy, right? Because that stuff's published, you know, that everybody can access the reports and so on. So how would you know, what advice would you give to somebody who's maybe, you know, a new manager, right? Who's trying to be that conduit, right? And they're not able to share. There's sometimes lots of proper, you know, regulatory and legal reasons why some companies can't be open. So what would you suggest to them in a remote environment? And like, how would they go about asking, you know, for information in order to be a better conduit, right, between the senior leadership and their team, right? What advice would you give?
That's a very good question. And I think that's a very important question as well. You know, I think if the company is not comfortable in disclosing the financials, one thing that we do in our weekly emails from our CEO is talk in percentages. And I don't know if that's what senior leadership would be willing to present, but saying like, you know, we've grown that money percent, or this is, you just like outlining some metrics and just kind of give a percentage instead of a number. And sometimes just that difference can really help. It is really up to the teams really to how they want to communicate that, and also depending on how the company is doing. You know, if the numbers are going down a little bit, you know you'll have to do a little bit more upfront communication and explaining what's going on as well. So it's a sticky situation in a remote context itself. I would say percentages or disclosing numbers if you can, but in the context of pandemic, there's sometimes a little bit more work that needs to be done in terms of the communication, just because of the current situation.
All right. No, I agree with you there. If anything, you know, I used to work for a media company, a media and tech company, and the CEO there, this was in the Middle East, you know, he had originally been the CEO of in a huge media conglomerate, and he said there's no such thing as over communication. And, you know, especially when it comes to your employees, you know, multi-channel, that's in normal times, right? This is when everything's going great. You're growing, we were growing like crazy. You know, we went from, as employee number 28, and we went to 400 in a year, right? Absolutely insane. And keeping everybody on track in terms of culture, direction, expectations, and so on, right? So we had, you know, intranets, email communication, brown bag lunches, town hall meetings, everything over and over again. And you know what? We sent out questionnaires and surveys. Hey, what do you know about this? And we had quizzes for fun. And we were shocked at how poorly people did on the quizzes. I was like, wait a minute, we've mentioned this 11 times in the past 3 weeks, right? And it's just, again, because people are bombarded in the old, you know, from marketing, right? Somebody needs to see an ad, was it 30 or 40 times before they remember it? It's almost like that piece. Now, as you alluded to, now we're in a situation where you're removed, right? And there is, yes, I'm sitting in my little attic room right now. There's not a lot of distractions, nothing on, I don't have walls, I have ceilings, but still there's a lot of things, right? So I'm imagining if you see my desk, right, I've got like 5 screens and iPads and microphones and headphones and all these kind of things going on. And with Slack, the multiple channels and, right? Things kind of get lost on it. So what, if you had to, as you've iterated through your processes and communication, is there one thing that stands out, that you learned that works for you in terms of communication where, you've tried 47 different ways and all of a sudden you try this one, it's like, why do they listen to that and not the other 46 things?
Yeah, it is a big question, and I don't know if we've fully arrived there, but we're trying our best to improve as many ways as we can. And one thing personally I have found helpful is not communicating just in one way. Some people are different learners, and as you said, sometimes you just need it to be repeated. And so putting things in writing, announcing it verbally, and if you can have a training or a video to just, especially if you're launching a program, and kind of using the same content but in different medium, just to really anchor the content and make sure that your team is aligned with you to speak the same, the same information, and really align it so that every method of communication links to each other and make it comprehensive. Otherwise, it's just information everywhere. And if someone's looking for the information, they might not know where to go. And so just making sure that information is aligned and using different types of communication to re-say the same things, especially in a remote context where you have someone like me who's English second language. uh, Sometimes I need a couple times before it sinks in.
Understand. All right, so fantastic. So, all right, so we've got this, right? So we've got these communications, things are going well, right? But we're still in this transition piece, right? So if I can't see you, I need you to ping me every hour and tell me what you're working on, right? So because before I could just kind of look down, okay, there you are. You look like you're, or walk behind you, see what's on your screen and stuff like that. So I don't have to worry, every once in a while. Now you're from home. What are you doing? Are you gardening? Are you, this and that and the other, right? You have all these fears, that existed before.
Hmm.
So this is why a lot of companies didn't go to remote, right? And it's, oh,
Hmm.
people, this is countered by almost 40 years of studies showing that people are more productive when they work from home. Um,
Hmm.
in certain circumstances, when given clarity of goals, and so on and so forth, and transparency, and there's a few things that you need to keep in there. But how do you help managers, or how have you helped managers stay away from the micromanaging, right? Because it's like, I can't see you, I can't talk to you easily. I can see you're on Slack, right? You're green on Slack, but maybe the person's on a conference call and you can't, if you don't use Teams, for example, right? Teams will tell you that you're busy or on a call, right? But what happens in Slack? You can't see that you're on a Zoom call or things like that, right? So how have you dealt with that, right? In terms of, like you said, you bring people in, sometimes it's their first remote experience, a manager. How do you help them kind of let go and become a little bit more results orientated?
Yeah, and you kind of said it right there, result orientated. And you alluded also earlier to OKRs, and I would love to bring this back. Having visible OKRs and having defined, results or goals that you have with your manager is really the key here. My manager, she's awesome, and she knows that my project is this. She knows why I'm doing this, and she knows when it's due, and so she can really keep me accountable to that. Uh, with this kind of goal oriented, we'll know if we have milestone to check in on the milestones. But I use my energy levels in the morning to do the more tedious work, and in the afternoon more of the meetings. And so I am able to design my own day however I like, and I feel even more productive, and I have a bigger output. And so really focusing on the results and goal oriented, OKR oriented will really help. It's also worth mentioning that, micromanaging is a symptom of lack of trust and lack of clear expectation around delegation. There's a really great tool called, if you type it, 5 levels of delegation, where you have level 1, where it's basically assess and report. And so you're asking the person to go assess and report back to you. And then level 5 is full delegation. You go, you make your own decision, run your thing, and come back and tell me how it was. And so it's really important you know where that person stands within those levels, articulate that expectation so they don't feel either micromanaged or abandoned by you. And that way you can have clear communication on those. But you really can't track someone's tasks or how they're working every day. And especially during COVID time, I want to make that distinction. It's not the same working remote during this pandemic as it is without this pandemic, because we can't really go out to the gym and take breaks and things like that. And so especially people with kids, their day might look different, but it doesn't mean that they're not productive. They're just productive in a different way. So keeping it goal-oriented, result-oriented is the key, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you mentioned, 5 levels of delegation. There's also, similar piece that we used to use in training 20 some years ago, called situational leadership, right? Because if somebody's brand new, it's not micromanaging to spend a lot of time with them, giving them, more specific direction, because you alluded to earlier, right? They will feel abandoned, right? If you just treat them like this very experienced person, right? So it's just which quadrant, we used to teach quadrants, do they fit in terms of, performance potential, ability, knowledge, those kind of things, and, start going through it. But I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It comes down to trust. And, using 5 levels of delegation, where do these people fit in, right? Are they new to the position? Are they still growing? And then, that should give you an indication of the level of support that you and direction that you provide to that person, right? So sometimes it's more push coaching, sometimes it's more pull coaching on that area. All right, so let's go to the next one, which is any tips for keeping remote meetings fun, right? So everybody now the articles are starting to talk about Zoom fatigue, right? So you've got these, people go meeting after meeting after meeting, right? So what are you doing? You're typically sitting in a chair, listening and sitting there. Maybe there's some background noise. Maybe there's chaos at your house, right? You've got 4 kids at home, or maybe you got 5 roommates who think they're funny, right? And you've got all these goofy and pets. Don't forget pets, right? Cats jumping, in front, dogs, wanting attention. You've got all this stuff going on, right? And you're trying to pay attention. And you got these one after another, right? So at least in the workplace, you'd stand up and walk to maybe a different room or interact and things like that. Now you're literally stuck in place, right? So some people are lucky, like I am, a stand-up desk, right? Which makes me even more animated. So I'm sitting down, so I'm relatively calm now. But, with the Zoom fatigue coming in, so, people are like, oh, not another, Zoom or fill in the blank meeting, Teams meeting, WebEx meeting, GoToMeeting, right? What would you say, in terms of your experience, how do you make them fun? How do you make them interactive, right? So there's the, hey, it's a serious business meeting. How do I keep this, lighten it up a little bit? Versus, hey, this is a meeting where we're doing a virtual happy hour and things like that. So talk to me about some of your experiences with the distinctions there.
No, absolutely. This is great. So we've tried to have so much fun on Zoom, and it's been quite fun. We have a workout together on Zoom tomorrow morning, and I'm very excited about that. We're trying new things, right? And we've done, obviously the theme Zooms. If you haven't heard of those, you basically either dress in the theme or you have a background that reflects maybe your next vacation or something like that. A little bit of a show and tell before the meeting, if the meeting allows. Obviously, if it is a serious meeting, maybe you don't want to do that there, but that's been very helpful. I love Snap Camera. If you don't know Snap Camera, just type it. You can basically download this thing on your browser, add a filter to Zoom, and for a quick second, our team was really into the baby filter. It was really fun. Another thing that I found really fun was my team member was presenting and they had trigger annotation while they were presenting. And that gives you the possibility to kind of give stickers like a star sticker or a heart sticker while they're presenting. They can't see you. They don't know if you're listening. And so they would present a point and then you just see the hearts coming and being posted on the page as they were presenting. Now, obviously you want to use wisdom because I can get out of control, but it was really fun to see like my teammates also engaging with the content because you really can't tell when it's a Zoom meeting just like that. And also props and celebrations, always, if you can enter them at the end, it's always great to end on a positive note, thanking each other for whatever accomplishment you did in the week. And these are just small little tips. There's so much out there to explore and to try with your team. We also have my team member started yesterday a introvert daily connection. So it's a Slack channel called 15 questions, and she's going to post a question, and all of us introverts that are not wanting to go on Zoom to connect are answering in a written form, and that's just a different way that we're exploring and how to connect with our team.
Okay, I'm going to take just go off on a slight tangent, but it's somewhat related, right? So we've got all these pieces, and what you just mentioned now regarding introvert, brought something up to my mind, and what a lot of people are asking about too, right? Which is, we already had enough challenges in the quote unquote normal workplace, right? As it relates to inclusivity. And this is beyond gender and race and nationality. We are talking about cognitive, diversity and things like that, right? Where you have people who think different ways, people who are on the spectrum, introvert, extrovert, ambivert, right? And some of these labels that people put on one another. And so in these kind of instances, right? So you gave one just great example, right? In the introvert piece where people are allowed to. So how would what have you done in terms of remote meetings, in terms of kind of a nod to some of these, right? Because, for an introvert to be on camera in your face and knowing that, 20 of your colleagues are watching you can be a little nerving, right? If you're in person, you have a little bit more feeling and control because you can see the room, right? And read the room, so to speak. Even though in Zoom, sometimes you can see everybody, but it's, not the same thing because your eyes are kind of like trying to view that. So, do you have any thoughts about that in terms of, like, you're not trying to drop your whole focus on inclusion, and as a matter of fact, some would argue that you could actually enhance it during these times, as the last example you just gave. Is there anything else in terms of your experience with helping with inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, you did cover a lot here, and it's really great. I think also a note is to not Zoom shame anyone if they don't want to put their video cam on or they prefer commenting in a chat box to keep that active. I think that's a very kind thing to do. If your team has strong feedback culture, you'll hear about ideas that they would prefer to engage, and really don't dismiss those. Try those if you can. And um, for our community, they are very verbal into what they like, the ideas that they have, and we are always looking for ideas. The people team doesn't have all the answers, and so it's really great to partner with your team members all across the company to really get ideas and making sure they're feeling comfortable, empowered, heard, and seen, but in a way that they're comfortable with as well.
Yeah, and one comment made to a couple clients, right? Business is not improv. If you have a meeting, right, and it's about X subject, a bunch of people come in, theoretically they know a little bit about it, but boom, right, these things are thrown at you. A presentation goes up, what do you think? And I'd like to think that I'm pretty quick on my feet, and I'm somewhat extroverted. Even that I was like, no, I'd rather have some time to think about that, right? So when I started looking into the research, right, in terms of meetings, right, and what meetings are successful, what are not, what are the elements of a successful meeting, and it was interesting that the best principles, not best practices, best principles include sending out an agenda ahead of time, right, and then secondly, stating the expectations from the individual. And then I looked at the inclusion training, and it's the same thing. They're saying, look, to include more people. So it's almost like if you want to have a great D&I, in your diversity and inclusion in your company, actually you go back to best principles, right? Because again, the introverts, they can think about it. Again, no Zoom shaming, and they can make comments on it because they've had time to absorb it and think about it and give some more feedback that they're comfortable with, right? Because it's thought through on that level.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing that we always say in at least our department meetings is, some of you might think of an idea after the meeting, and that's just how you process, and that's okay. And there's room for you to still speak up after the meeting is over, just because we want to acknowledge different types of personality and different, engagement levels, and how I can't brainstorm on the spot. So I'm one of those people. I appreciate that. And so things like that are 100% are super helpful.
Yeah, and you know what? I think everybody in the world has at one time or in a lot of people, probably weekly or daily, is, oh, I should have said this, right? When they mention this, like, pops into your head, 10 minutes or 2 hours or the next day, right? You're like, oh, should have mentioned this. So that's a great point there, is leaving, the meeting, quote unquote, open, right? For follow-up notes
Yeah.
and say, hey, I just remembered something when you mentioned this, kind of like that's the way the brain works, right? It makes these connections from all these pieces. And then, oh, here's where it is. All right. All right, we're on a roll here. So, that we alluded to this in the beginning, right? So, how can we help people with work-life balance when work is in our home, right? We're here, like, all the time. You got your lovely plants there, okay? So how do we tell the plant, okay, now I'm switching from work to, personal time and so on and so forth. How do we, make boundaries? I mean, I'm sure you maybe cover this in onboarding and help people with. So how do you help people transition, like you said, from a non-remote environment to a remote environment like yours, right? And how do you help them along that journey, especially in trying to draw a line?
Absolutely. And I don't know if you've looked at on our missions, we have a dual mission as a company, and the second one is living fulfilling and impactful lives. And that really speaks into that, is being able to live a balanced life as well, right? To feel fulfilled and impactful. And so, because of that, we do have a benefit that we have for our team called comp.io. And it gives them monthly stipends to all the team members that are remote to invest into their home office. And so I'm sure if you Google, remote work best practices on how to create boundaries, having your own space within your place to work and keep that separated, it is a huge plus in creating that boundary. And so as a company, we're trying to help support that by providing stipends monthly. And we also don't want to assume that someone's need is someone's need as well. So we wanted them to be able to design their own perks if you want. And so that we found that was a great way to, if they want to design or upgrade their home office, feel comfortable, get their own home office snacks, their own little coffee machine, and just make sure that separation is happening is huge. The second thing is trying not to message after hours. You can take advantage of some Slack integration to, if you get a spur of energy late at night, to pre-write your Slack messages and schedule them for the next morning, and making sure that you're not generating this constant feel of work where you never really start, never really finish. When I start, I open my laptop and I start, and when I close my laptop, I know I don't need to reopen it, and I don't feel that pressure because my team members are messaging me after hours. So that's super helpful. And personally for me, having a healthy morning routine, getting dressed, not staying in my pajamas, and then carving an hour for lunch in my calendar so it's protected time is absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, that's great. And also, at the same time, the element, and you touched on it earlier, right, in terms of clarity of communication and expectations. And it's interesting that you talk about the difference between COVID-19 remote work and regular remote work, right? Because we have, clients and folks who are talking about the challenges, right, because of childcare. So a lot of folks actually are flipping their work days around, right? So, okay, the kids sleep till 9, right? So I'm going to work from 5 a.m. to 9, kind of take the midday 9 to 3, and then pass child on to my husband or wife or their other partner, right? And say, okay, I'm going to then now work from like 3 to 7, and then maybe from 9 to 10, right? And structure
Mhm,
their work days like that, which would not be
mhm.
in a normal remote situation, but is reality in the COVID-19. So you've highlighted that, right? So sometimes there's a difference there, but it's just a matter of communicating, right? And what some of our clients and actually some folks at 7Geese say, this is my life now, right? So my partner and I, we split up the childcare area responsibility. So I'm going to work in the morning, and he's going to work in the afternoon, or she's going to work in the afternoon, and work it that way. But again, it just comes down to communication, right? So, and
Absolutely.
like you said, scheduling some pieces. All right, so they can work all morning and then just schedule pieces for delivery that afternoon, or
Mhm.
something at that level. So it's just fascinating how individuals have been able to adapt, and quickly too, in terms
Yes.
of these areas. Um, and sometimes some of the meeting requests, because I get, oh, just like a meeting at 9 o'clock at night, and then, oh yeah, that's right, that person had mentioned, that's when they can do it on
Mhm.
pieces like that. All right, well, let's continue. So, now it comes down to HR, right? So we've seen a lot of reporting out there and a lot of surveys, talking about, HR stepping up, HR filling the gap, HR, engaging in leadership. So, the question here is, what programs can HR introduce to help keep a remote workforce engaged, right? Some people are looking for, because we saw from the survey that was done earlier, right? We've got a lot of people that are, 17% are going, I believe it was a number that's going to stay fully remote, and then a bunch of them kind of coming back in a blended piece, right? So that's the majority. So
Mhm.
now we've got to think, okay, so we've got, great, you did a really great job as delineating between remote work, COVID-19, and remote work. So how do we transition, what programs can we do now? What are some short-term programs? And then longer term, how do we help out in keeping
Absolutely.
workforces engaged?
Yeah, it's a complex question, and we could answer this in so many different ways. Let me do the social and the engagement part into the separate points.
Okay.
One of them, if you want to keep the social part, the engagement of like, mingling with each other and feeling connected to the company and feeling engaged with what's going on. Again, I will reiterate the donut chats was really great. We have also over 300 public channels on Slack, like from dogs to plant parenting to food to games to music. So you can really engage in different themes and topics here. Whatever you want. And we also have coffee chats started by my CEO originally, where he just wanted FaceTime with people to talk about whatever. There's no agenda. And so that's a standing meeting every Friday morning where 20, 30 of us just show up to the call and socialize together with our execs. And it's been really, really great. Now, the other part of it is to keep engaged. If you're asking for feedback to your team, make sure that you show action. I think that's a huge one, that sometimes you give feedback and you're remote, you feel a little bit isolated. It's like, man, I've been giving this feedback and I don't know what's going on with the solution or if they've heard me, right? And so as an HR team, I would really connect the feedback to we're working on a solution or really displaying and communicating the action. And that's going to speak loudly to your team feeling like, okay, I feel like I said something, I was heard and something happened, and I gave an idea and I was acknowledged. Maybe we didn't pick that idea, but there's this feeling of make sure people are heard, make sure that every time someone messages me, if I don't answer with a text, I at least put an emoji like got it. And so the action to response to either a feedback or to just in communication really helps people feeling like they're connected and engaged with you.
All right, that sounds great. So, when you feel people feel that connection, right? And it's done virtually, and they feel connected to both the goals of the organization. They feel connected to the team, the goals of the team coming through. In terms of going forward, right? So as this becomes quote unquote normalized, right? So the rest of the world catches up to what you've been doing, for the past couple of years. Is there one thing, if you can highlight the most beneficial, um, program or initiative that you've done that really it's the 20, 80-20 rule, right? What's this initiative is like 20%, gives you 80% of the results. Does this something pop into your mind in terms of it has it's a small effort, but it has outsized results?
Ooh, I would have to think about it a little bit more. I'm sure we have a couple of those. The first thing that popped to mind is the way we structure our weekly Webflow meetings,
Yeah.
and make sure that we focus on more high level and celebrating everyone, talking about high level business, and then the updates, product or announcements and things like that. And the way we kind of design those, we try to do it in a way that is engaging and sometimes just restructuring your all hands or your Webflow weekly or your weekly meeting is all you need to kind of up the engagement. And so I would play around with that, see um, what a team is responding to, and ask for feedback around those, and see if you can integrate a different element or remove something. that maybe is dragging the meeting down, and like we could actually read about this, we don't really need to hear about it, but we prefer to hear more about this.
Yeah. And there's also some great tools out there as well, especially related to meetings where you can ask questions anonymously and you can vote
Mm-hmm.
questions up and down. And so you can see what's on people's minds, right? And again, nobody wants to put their hand up, you can assign your name to it, or you can do it anonymously, right? So you get some of those, the questions that percolate up. And it was interesting, I heard of a company where, again, a negative was turned into a positive where they had this feature, right? And there was a pretty provocative question asked about diversity in a positive sense, and then a lot of it was it was downvoted with some pretty anti-diversity commentary. And the CEO was on the call, and he watched this thing get downvoted, and he said, "Stop right there," right? And he addressed it, the concern. So even in a situation where it got a little bit negative, right? He turned around and said, no, 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 no. This one's, you're not going to downvote this one. I'm watching it drop, and this is not acceptable. These are
Mm-hmm.
our values. This is the way we expect you to behave. And, these comments and so on and so forth are inappropriate, right? So, again, even with, like you said, the meetings, right? And structuring them and using technology and tools, you can actually turn something that was initially negative, right, into a positive piece. So that person, while I'm sure they didn't appreciate some of the comments related to their initial question, that person is now fully aware that they have the CEO backing them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things that, even in these situations, it's not ignore the bad things in your company, quite the opposite, right? It's a chance to continue to get these things out and address them. When actually in an open live meeting, somebody probably wouldn't have said anything, right? They would have thought these things in their head, but because of anonymity, they added some of their comments, right? And so it brought a problem to light, and they were able to turn it around. So
Yeah. One other thing, if I can piggyback off that, is if you have core values or core behaviors, to really make sure that you are not just saying it, but you're living it. And
yeah,
often it is super important. And often you live it when something like that happens and you have to say something. Kindness is one of our core behaviors. So, or radical candor. And so our CEO would address this because we have something that we say, this is our core behavior, this is what we stand on, and really not just putting those in a fancy poster, but really living it out. It speaks volume.
all right. So we're on the home stretch here. So, what are some things HR executives need to keep updating during the pandemic, right? So, a couple of things that I've seen is, wow, we're pretty good at technology, but there's still a gap to where we should be, in terms of HR people in general. Exposes, most HR people admit, hey, I need to know more about tech. I need to know more about data analytics. I need to know more about, some of these areas. Is that, you've been down in the trenches, right? Anything that, comes to mind in terms of where you see HR, in terms of education, support, what SHRM is not teaching us or telling us? Where's the gap? Where, what do we need to keep, and improving on?
Ooh, that's a big question. I would say, like, in terms of tech, especially, as find tech that serves you and serves your team. There's just so much out there, and it's really easy to be overwhelmed and to go overboard in a way where it just confuses more than it helps. Really vetting your tools to really work for you and for your team versus just picking it out because it looks cool and it's the latest thing. Definitely is something that I would keep updating your tech, because if you were 100% in an office and now you're not even sure you're going back to the office, you'll have to change the way communication is done, the way the projects are done, the way things are done. So you'll need tools, but make sure that you pick ones that work for each other. And my biggest thing is integration, integration, and integration. And so the less manual work you can do as an HR, the better. That's my philosophy. And so I always look at, can this tool integrate with this? Can the flow just go with this? And can I merge all my benefits and all my communication to this one thing, and kind of play around with that? There is so much out there that you can do. And so I would say keep it serving you, serving your team. Don't get too overwhelmed by all that is out there. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty fun. I don't I could answer it in so many different ways, but I thought this is, the way we do onboarding, the way we are designing our path for the experience of the team member, but also for our experience as a team. So we're not scrambling in the background, just trying to do everything manually because we don't have anything, and trying to figure out that flow, and making sure that, there's less gap, and things are taken care of. If you need any advice or any suggestion or any ideas of what we're doing here, I'm happy to always, you can email me and ask me more. I'm happy to go and deep dive into that.
All right. So, again, a couple, conscious of time here, we got a few minutes left. So, in terms of now we're getting down into the nitty gritty, right? So what are some tips for running performance reviews? So you're trying to talk to people, right? It's awkward enough face to face, right? So now you're having to do on a Slack calls, right? So, we're both in the somewhat school or religion, so to speak, of, continuous performance management, one-on-ones, right? This isn't the once a year, that, type of situation. We both believe in the continuous performance management process, bite-sized pieces, little feedback, continuous improvement, all that kind of stuff. So how do you do that? How do you help your teams and your leaders, right, do this on like breathing, right, in terms of a remote?
Yeah, and we are currently building it out. So in the way we've arrived, but we're trying to look at it as a life cycle, like a circular thing through the year, where it's not one thing, not one remote performance review here twice a year. We're trying to have different programs that help build a comprehensive story here around impact and performance. One of the areas and the components that I take care of is called team development cycles. And it's really purely for development and growth, and it seeks reflections and feedback from peers, managers, and self. And the way we are able to kind of see success here is I over communicate everything. I create a handbook and I publish it 4 to 6 weeks before we launch the whole thing. It explains the why, the timelines, the best practices, how to write impactful feedback, how to look for bias, how to select peers. And then there's a FAQ question for the most frequently asked questions. And then from there, we have announcements, obviously, at the Webflow Weekly. And then this week, we're trying trainings. We're training managers and we're training individual contributors to have, again, that other medium of communication. And also we can answer questions and show them what is the best practice for this, just to ensure there's success. Because sometimes, especially if you're remote, you have a lot of fear, like, how am I perceived? And so it helps to kind of over communicate it for the get-go. And then obviously the one-on-ones after the cycle is done is really important. You can have all the feedback you want, and if your one-on-one is not, impactful, you're not going to learn anything or apply anything into your growth journey. So educating, the managers and helping and guiding the ICs as well as they are going through their journey of development and growth is crucial. We do templates, we do best practices, we do trainings, and we kind of just try to create a circle and a cycle around that whole thing to make sure that it's positive and it's successful and people feel inspired at the end of the day. They're like, okay, I have things to work on. My life, I can do that. I have baby steps. I have a growth plan with my manager, and in 6 months we'll talk again, type thing.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the final slide. So in a second, we're gonna do a poll. But before we get to the poll, first of all, I want to thank Jules for joining us today. Also want to thank Sapling and of course 7 Geese for helping to sponsor this webinar. I hope that people found it useful. So one last piece, right? So you introduced yourself in the beginning. So in terms of this, you'd mentioned earlier, people can go ahead and email you. Tell us the best way to get in touch with you, LinkedIn, your email address, things like that. So go ahead and I'll give you the opportunity to share that now.
Yeah, absolutely. Email is best, jules@webflow.com. If you have any comments, ideas, questions, I'm always happy to dialogue and chat and share my learnings here that I've learned here at Webflow. So email is 100% better.
Okay, so that sounds great. So now you've heard it straight from Jules. So jules@webflow.com. So in terms of myself, same thing, Robert@7geese.com, the number 7, then Geese. You could also go to my LinkedIn, send in a request. Happy to share information. A lot of what I do, I share in terms of videos and blog posts and things like that. So you can keep up to date in terms of when I'm pontificating about a subject. So once again, I'd like to thank Jules for joining us today and helping our folks. And then now we're going to the poll, right? So in terms of what you heard today, especially Jules mentioned earlier about sapling and its focus on onboarding, right? Which to me, it resonates so much because of the importance of the onboarding aspect, and obviously 7 Geese in terms of what we touched on in terms of continuous performance management, and as Jules mentioned, the clarity and transparency involved in the OKR process. So if you'd like to see any of these platforms or get more information, again, just go ahead and click on the poll, either for more information on 7 Geese or at Sapling, please let us know. But otherwise, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and really appreciate you spending part of your day with us. Thank you.